Have you ever gotten a Ghostface mask and wanted to either give it a shroud because it was missing one, or just simply wanted to replace it? I know I have. Personally, my biggest gripe is that Funworld continues to use hot glue to attach the shrouds to their hard plastic masks. I live in Texas heat. Using hot glue to attach anything is about as useful as using your own fucking spit. So I've made this video here today to go ahead and cleanse the sins of Funworld by going in and manually sewing the shrouds onto their hard plastic masks. Today, I went ahead and reshrouded a pumpkin mask. We also went ahead and reshrouded the Icebound Phantom mask. So now that we've gotten the intro out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right into the tutorial. Before we can go ahead and start adding a new shroud to our masks, we first need to remove the current shroud. In regards to a hard plastic mask that's hot glued on, it's really easy. You just rip it off. But when it comes to our sewn on shrouds, we have to go ahead and be a little bit more gentle. So we're going to be using a seam ripper. Now, using the pointy side of our seam ripper, we're going to go in between the threading and then apply a little bit of pressure to break that seam. Next, we can start using the softer rounded side to go ahead and remove the other stitching that is applied to our mask. And you want to make sure that you're doing this all the way through around your mask. Take as much time as you need. This part can be a little bit time consuming. And once you've successfully removed your old shroud, you can now use this as a pattern to make your new one. First, you got to go ahead and make sure you flip it inside out, so that way you can have a proper pattern. And this takes us to our next segment, which is creating a pattern for our shroud. Now, I'm using an old shroud that I ripped off from my mask, specifically the American flag mask, and I'm going to use this to make all my future shrouds by laying it on top of my fabric of choice. Now, I have my new fabric that I'm going to be making the shroud of, currently folded in half, as we need to have two sides of our shroud cut out in order to make a new one. Now, it's very important when you lie your shroud on top of your fabric that both the shroud and the fabric are lying flat. This is because we are going to have to use chalk to mark the outline, and any wrinkle can cause your shroud to be misshapen and not fit properly. Now, here you can see that I'm using my chalk to go ahead and trace my shroud onto my new fabric that I want my shroud to be made out of. It's important that you give yourself a little bit of extra room. This is going to be what we call a seam allowance. And since I have a particularly big head, I like to give myself roughly an inch to an inch and a half amount of extra space. And if there's any excess room, I can always take it in with the sewing machine. And now that we've successfully gone ahead and traced our pattern, we're going to go ahead and remove our shroud from the fabric. Now, the easiest way to go ahead and cut our fabric is going to be with a rotary cutter. Kind of looks like a pizza wheel, and it lets you cut through about 2 layers at a time whenever you're cutting fabric. Be careful not to apply too much pressure. I tend to hold my tools like a Neanderthal and use Gorilla Grip, and I've managed to cut my fingers on the sides multiple times. Now that you've gone ahead and removed your shroud from the excess fabric, we're good to go on to our next step, which is sewing the 2 pieces together to make ourselves a new shroud. Now I'm going to be utilizing a sewing machine, and I'm going to simply go around the outer edge of the shroud, only missing the back neckline and the face hole. Now, you can accidentally go ahead and sew over these and make this unusable, so if you want to use your chalk to go ahead and mark where the face hole and where the back of the neckline is, by all means, feel free to do that. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit of extra guidance. Once sewn together, it should look a little bit something like this. Now, the way that we're going to attach these shrouds are different depending on what type of mask you are shrouding. First, we'll cover the hard plastic. And for the hard plastic, you're going to need to have a wood burner's tool or a hot knife. This is because we want to poke holes into our hard plastic mask in order to have a sewing guide for us to sew through and attach the shroud on. We're not tolerating any hot glue here. Now, when you're going through and burning holes into your mask, make sure that you don't accidentally hit the elastic strap. That part's kind of important to be wearing the mask. And you also want to be vigilant about the sides of your tool accidentally hitting or nicking other parts of the mask. It is incredibly easy to melt a part on accident, so just be careful when you're using the tool. Once all your holes have been punched for your sewing guide, we're now good to go ahead and stuff our mask into our shroud. You're going to want to make sure that your shroud is still inside out with the raw edges facing outside, and you're going to put your mask inside the face hole like this. Now we get to use our next tool, which are some sewing clips. We're simply going to grab our sewing clips and run them around the edge, clipping the shroud to our mask. Make sure you have it nice and centered using that center seam from the top of your shroud to align it to your mask. Once you've gone ahead and clipped all around the edge of your mask and your shroud, you can take a look at it and make sure that it's centered and that nothing looks out of place. Now that we have our shroud how we want it, it's time for us to begin hand sewing. Since this is a hard plastic mask, we're not really able to have the luxury of a sewing machine. So grab yourself some thread and needle and start hand sewing around through the holes until you've successfully completed your shrouding. I like to work in halves, but I also understand if you would like to work in quarters, or whatever pace might be best suited for you. Your main goal is to just get a full lap around your mask. Once you've gone ahead and successfully sewn your shroud on, you're good to go ahead and give it a test fit. Here are the results of the mask that you just saw on video. Now that we've completed the hard plastic, let's take a look at the soft vinyl mask reshroud process. With our freshly made new shroud, we're going to put our mask into the shroud through the face hole. You want to make sure that the shroud is still inside out with the raw edges facing outwards. Next, we're going to center the shroud with our mask by using the top stitch seam. Now we get to use our next tool, which are some sewing clips. We're simply going to grab our sewing clips and run them around the edge, clipping the shroud to our mask. Once we've successfully clipped the shroud all the way around our mask, we could start at the top center of our mask with the vinyl facing down against the bottom of our machine. Now for this portion, it's important that you take your time and don't go too fast, as mistakes can happen at any point. You'll want to slowly follow along and remove clips as you make progress towards the chin. I like to stop roughly a little bit above the jawbone, and you're going to want to do this on both sides. The reason we stop slightly above the jawbone is because it's incredibly difficult to try and wedge the bottom of the chin into the sewing machine and can cause more issues than solutions. So what we'll end up doing is hand stitching the bottom portion of the chin. And here I went ahead and flipped the shroud just to see what it looks like so far, and it's coming out pretty good. So let's begin the hand stitching portion. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we can't really use the sewing machine to stitch all the way underneath the chin. Maybe if there was a different tool or if I had a different sewing machine, it would be possible, but on mine, it just isn't. So we're going to hand stitch the bottom from chin to chin to get a nice, clean, smooth stitch all the way around. Now, depending on how your vinyl mask was casted, it could be thicker or thinner than mine, so your mileage may vary on how time-consuming and how much effort is required to actually push through. But we will be stitching new holes, or if you have a mask that already had a sewn shroud, you can reuse the old holes. It makes us a great guide. And with our shroud successfully attached, here's another fitting. I went ahead and made my shroud a little bit longer, maybe a little bit too long, but we can go ahead and stuff it in, and it's perfect for cosplay purposes or for film or whatever it may be. Now, whenever you're shrouding these masks, I always recommend that you go ahead and give yourself a little bit of extra room, primarily because it's always easier to resize something to be smaller than it is to resize something to be bigger. Now, with that being said, I hope you found today's video useful. I hope that you're able to go out and reshroud your masks confidently now and have a mask that is incredibly cool to look at and comfortable to wear. This was very fun to go back and remaster, so I'm glad that we were able to adjust this, and hopefully it is better than the older variant. Some further steps that you could take is adding some Velcro to your shroud. I have a shorts video that you can go ahead and watch regarding that. I also have a shorts video if you want to go ahead and replace your eye mesh. I've also gone ahead and opened up a Patreon. Reason for this is that making videos like these that are tutorial and informationals often tend to get a little bit expensive when it comes to the resources required. And oftentimes I find myself working on multiple tutorial videos simultaneously, so really any little bit goes a long way. We have some really fun rewards, and I hope that you go ahead and check them out. I'm very new to the whole Patreon thing, so I'm trying to make it all worth your while. Currently, the Patreon will allow you to get shouted out at the end of these videos. You also get early access to my YouTube content, my photography content, also on Instagram, check it out. And if you have a suggestion as to what else I could add to the Patreon that you think would be valuable, I would love to hear it. Any additional resources and information required for this video will be found in the description, so make sure you check that out if you need any further assistance. I've been Punkanachi. Thank you for watching.